Edgar Allan, a novel, Chapter 22. At dinner that night, neither Sally Ann or Stephen said anything at all about what happened during the day. They didn't mention Joe Ryder or what Mother had told them or their fear. They just sat at the table and ate. Sally Ann has never been able to keep from explaining over and over again whom she taught and what each day, even if it turns out to have only been Stephen. But that night, she just sat quietly and ate what was put in front of her. She wouldn't look at me or at MN or Mother, neither would Stephen. I figured they had made their own decision, some kind, and had either decided to accept what Mother told them or what Joe Ryder had. What worried me a little was that if they chose what Joe Ryder said as truth, what would they do? But they didn't seem to be doing anything. Sally Ann helped Mother clear the dishes afterwards, and Stephen went straight up to his room to get ready for bed. A little later, S.A. followed him up, and they both came down in their pajamas, kissed Mother and then Father good night, and went back upstairs. That was all there was to it. Almost. About an hour later, they made a reappearance. Father was in his study, and Mother sat down in front of the television set with MN and me, knitting and watching the news. It was she who noticed two skinny shadows creeping down the front stairs. Mother turned around in her chair and saw Stephen and Sally Ann, each with a small suitcase, slipping down the last few steps and running for the front door. As the door opened, she stood up and called, "Robert!" My father came out of his study. Mother pointed toward the front door and moved in that direction. Father followed. MN and I rushed to the window. What we saw was S.A. and Stephen, hand in hand, walking quickly down a path toward the street. They had their suitcases in opposite hands and walked very fast without looking back. Father went to the door. "Sally Ann!" he called. S.A. stopped but didn't look back. When Father didn't call again right away, she and Stephen went on, turning right and starting up the street. "Sally Ann!" Father called again, and S.A. stopped again. Stephen Paul turned around. Finally, after a long minute, S.A. turned too, to see Father coming out the front door and started down the path. Then, as we watched Father come out the front door and started down the path again, Father stopped and held open his arms. No one moved. I think my mother had stopped breathing. MN grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard. Stephen, without saying a word to Sally Ann, took his hand away from hers and ran back toward Father, crying as loud as I've ever heard him. He came running up and jumped into Father's arms, which came around him so fast you could hardly see them move. Sally Ann just watched. Then, after a moment, she turned around and started walking away from the house again. I guess she had decided to go it alone. "Sally Ann!" Father called again, just loudly enough for her to hear. She stopped and stood without turning. Father, still holding Stephen Paul, walked down the path to her. When he reached her, Father took S.A.'s hand and turned her around. Together, Stephen being carried and Sally Ann being towed, they came home.